What, just to be safe thing you did ended up saving you later. I booked a vacation for my wife's birthday in Cabo San Lucas months in advance. For some reason, as I was booking it, I decided to get the trip insurance. I'd never done that before, but this time I thought I'd better do it. Our trip was to be in October. I booked it in June. The beginning of September, a hurricane struck Cabo and did a lot of damage. I contacted the resort and they said they were not very badly affected. I left the reservation booked. The day before we were to fly to Cabo, I checked the flights and everything was good to go. We get to the airport, and as we were checking in, the woman checking us in said, "Oh, there's a problem with your connecting flight." Yeah, the problem was the connecting flight had been canceled over a month ago. Yeah, Expedia neglected to tell us that little bit of info. I was able to recoup all of the money we spent because of the insurance. And here is the proof that sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, especially when dealing with airlines and travel websites. Story 2. Was remodeling my house, took out a loan, and had to get the house appraised to get the loan. Found that my house was worth $100K more than I had insured it for. Raised my limits on home insurance to $50K more than the appraised value in anticipation of completing renovations. 2 weeks later, the house burned to the ground due to a faulty bathroom fan that I did not even touch. City, insurance company, and loan company all sent separate investigators due to how shady it looked. Story 3. I was 19 and home for the summer from college. I had a bottle of Bacardi stashed in my bedroom under a pile of clothes and other stuff between my bed and the window. My grandfather appears in a dream and sits me down with this bottle to chew me out, not for having booze as a kid, but for hiding it so poorly. I wake up, a bit disturbed by this dream, and throw the bottle of Bacardi in a duffel bag and toss that in the trunk of my car as I leave for work. Got home that evening, and the pile it had been stashed under was moved as my mom had set up a table with a fan by the window to get air moving. Grew up in northern Wisconsin without AC. Wouldn't have been a fun rest of the summer had I been busted with that. Story 4. One time I unplugged my TV and game systems before leaving home ahead of a big storm. Came back to find that everything I hadn't plugged had fried completely. To answer you all, I've had surge protectors not do their jobs before, so I thought it'd be a good idea to be safe. Also, all my appliances were covered under my renter's insurance policy, but none of my, quote, entertainment media devices would have, as I was not a student, so I don't really have a need for that stuff. I'd have gotten a check for my TV and stuff, which would have replaced it, but this was before the days of cloud game saving, so I would have lost all of my progress and a couple games that came with the console when I bought it used. No, a breaker won't protect you from a surge, only from a short circuit. You'd need an arc fault breaker with built-in surge protection, very expensive in comparison to a renter's/homeowner's insurance policy. Story 5. Many years ago when I was a tech at a call center, I was on a call with the client's IT guy to fix a corrupted database. Their IT guy shared screens with me so that I could do work on the recovery. The IT guy renamed the files as screwed_db, screwed_backup_db, etc. And just to be safe, I had him say that it was he who named all the files as such and not me. I asked him to confirm this each time I had to touch the files. I took screenshots also. Little did I know, this call was monitored, voice and screen recording. A day later, I got called in by a manager asking me to explain a situation that came out of a recent call I was on. He had only seen a few screenshots that were made by the recording program. I told him to watch the whole video with the synced audio. A few hours later, he called me into his office to apologize for speaking to me with such an accusatory tone. Moral of the story? Always cover your back. On the brighter side, after the incident, this manager was always super nice to me and backed me up whenever there was an issue. He even wrote me a rave review and recommendation on LinkedIn, back when LinkedIn actually got you jobs. Story 6. A couple of years ago, I restarted The Sopranos from season 1. I think it's in the first season where the water heater leaks and floods Tony's basement. So there are these scenes where he's waiting around in a flooded basement, and I was imagining what a nightmare that would be. It reminded me that when I bought my house, the inspector told me I would need to replace the water heater within 5 years. I then realized that it was like 12 years prior, so I suddenly got nervous. I went and looked at the water heater and it seemed fine, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I also didn't have the money to pay to have a new water heater installed, so I decided to go ahead and buy a new water heater and then save up money to pay someone to install it. The water heater arrived and I stored it in the laundry room. Just a few weeks after it arrived, I happened to look at the old water heater and I noticed the catch pan under it had an inch of water in it. It was leaking. Oh no. Emergency. Except, wait a minute, I already have a plan for this. So instead of saving up money to hire a plumber, I went to YouTube and learned how to install my own water heater. It all worked out perfectly fine, all because The Sopranos made me anxious about the condition of my water heater, causing me to randomly purchase a water heater I had no immediate plan to install. Story 7. This one is a bit more lighthearted. A few years ago, I went on a trip to Venice. It was going to be sunny, and I knew I had terrible luck, and that there are so many pigeons, so I took an old white baseball hat with me and put it on. Of course, a pigeon crap on my head. Right on the hat I had with me just in case. Story 8. I was out solo hiking and camping. It was the end of a long day, and I really didn't feel like taking the time to tie up a bear bag, a bag with all your food tied up in a tree far away from your camp. I said, you know what, just to be safe, I'll go set one up. Cut to the middle of the night, I'm walking up to the sound of a black bear walking 30 feet away from my hammock and heading straight to where I tied up my food. Story 9. I bought a really nice tablet a few years ago, a Wacom Intuo Cintiq, essentially a drawing tablet built into a laptop for animation and the like. Sometimes when you buy nice things, they come in nice boxes, and for some reason, I don't really want to throw this box away immediately. I put it in the storage area of my basement and forgot all about it. After only about a month, this $2,500 tablet stopped working. It wasn't dropped or damaged, and I'm still not sure how it broke. It would simply just try to boot up and fail, crashing and demanding a restart. I called support, and after several calls and many hours, we were unable to resolve the issue. They said I could send it back and get a new one if it wasn't physically damaged. They told me it needed to be sent back in the original box. I now keep boxes for everything I buy until the warranty expires. Story 10. Went hiking in the middle of the day with a friend and his girlfriend. I brought the flashlights for each of us. Well, the hike took a lot longer than expected, and my buddy's girlfriend sprained her foot at the end. It took us nearly 3 times as long to get back, and it was dark with relatively rocky terrain. Those flashlights saved our bacon. I can't even fathom how long it would take to stumble in the dark otherwise. Story 11. I was driving on the highway headed back to college, and I saw a flatbed semi coming in the opposite direction that looked to be carrying railroad ties. Big square logs, basically. I think to myself, it sure would be bad if one of those things fell off. I held my gaze on the semi, and you can guess what? Immediately fell off and started tumbling right down the center of my lane. I'm convinced I wouldn't have been able to react to it properly if I hadn't just thought of that exact circumstance. Yo, that's some Final Destination stuff right there. Story 12. My friends and I were always giving crap to another friend because he was never wearing the seatbelt while driving. One night, another friend and he drove me home. It was pretty late, and we were all tired. When they dropped me off, I told him, use a freaking seatbelt, you idiot. The next day, around lunchtime, I got a call that my 2 friends got in a car accident. The idiot fell asleep while driving my other idiot friend's car. They hit a parked car, which hit the car in front of it and got stuck into a wall. The parked car acted as a ramp for their car. They flipped over and slid. For some reason, the idiot had his seatbelt on for the first time ever, and he didn't get injured. Both of them crawled outside the car without a single scratch. If I'm not wrong, my friend in the passenger seat broke his pinky, though. Idiot learned his lesson, and his seatbelt is always on now, even when he's in the passenger seat. Story 13. We recently went driving around Wales and always use Google Maps for navigation. Last week, the O2 network went down for most of the day while we were smack in the middle of nowhere, which would have been made searching for destinations impossible. But I had the forethought that even with a perfectly working cellular network, Wales is full of countryside, so signal may be lost a lot, so I pre-downloaded the entire northern half of Wales onto my phone before we set off so a data connection wasn't required to navigate. I think we'd still be driving right now if I didn't do that. Story 14. I used to be a banner tow pilot and was often asked to fly banners over the NYC area, especially over the Hudson River. I would pick them up at an airport in New Jersey and make my way over from there. Typically, if you were to run into some kind of engine problem, you have a fair number of places you could theoretically land if you had engine trouble. Not so much over the NYC metro area, so I picked out a trail of breadcrumbs, if you will, of specific places I could try to land my plane if I ever had to. On the 1-year anniversary of the Miracle on the Hudson, Captain Sullenberger, etc., I was given the job to fly a banner over a boat on the Hudson that would be carrying the crew and some passengers from the flight. On the way there, my engine failed while I was less than 1,000 feet above the ground. Sinking quickly, I needed to find a place to land right away. Fortunately, my best previously selected spot was just to my left, a landfill on Staten Island, and I put the plane right on the top of it. Story 15. I've had a handful of these in my life. The one that popped in my head first was from a party when I was 16. It was in a small farm town about 20-25 minutes from my actual town, and everyone is out partying in somebody's parents' barn and having a real good time. I didn't realize that our DD had been drinking all night. When it was time to go, I couldn't even tell she was tipsy. But something wasn't right, so I didn't want to drive back with them. For whatever reason, I decided to get the verbal tongue lashing from my mom when she came to pick me up. While my friends in the first car were apparently veering across the road, Got picked up by the cops and all of them got to spend the night in jail. Glad I opted for my mom. Story 16. I had originally booked a rental car for a trip to Iceland using my credit card points. 2 days before, I canceled and booked it with my credit card, which provides rental vehicle coverage because it looked like the weather wasn't going to be great while we were there, and I wanted the extra protection. While there, we got into an accident for which we were not at fault. The car was almost a total loss, and I had to pay $12,000 plus out of pocket to the company. It took a few months and a ton of paperwork, but the credit card company refunded all of it. I still think about how lucky I was that I changed the booking. I would have been ruined for a very long time otherwise. Story 17. For years, I kept an old hospital-issued diaper bag in the trunk of my car with a full set of clothes for each of my boys and a spare t-shirt for me. It got significant use for years and saved us countless times. I'd switch out clothes every 6 months or so when they hadn't been used, trading up a size or two and from one season to another. Kept it till a couple of months ago when I sold my last car. That diaper bag was his, trusty sidekick, always ready for action. Dirty diapers, outfit emergencies, rogue juice boxes, it'd seen it all. Hey, and speaking of things that have seen it all, ever wonder who's watching you online? Spoiler alert, it's pretty much everyone. Your internet provider, advertisers, hackers, even that one weird guy in that public Wi-Fi, you know what I'm talking about. Let's be real, your ISP can see your entire browsing history. Yes, even in the incognito windows. Yikes. So yeah, let that sink in for a second. Do you really want them knowing about that late night research you've been doing? A wink wink. I didn't think so. I wouldn't either. That's where NordVPN comes in. With military-grade encryption, your data is locked down. Your IP, hidden. Your browsing history, completely private, even from your own internet provider. Plus, with lightning-fast servers in over 118 countries, you can stream, you can shop, and you can game without lag or restrictions. No more annoying geo-blocks or buffering wheels. Because online security isn't optional, it is essential. So protect your data, dude. Protect your privacy and maybe protect your dignity. Get NordVPN by clicking the link in the description below. It's the best VPN out there. We've been using it at Rufus HQ for 2 years now, and if you use the link in the description below, you'll be supporting the channel, awesome, and you'll get yourself 70% off plus 6 months free by using that link below. So please do go ahead and click on it. Thanks for listening so far and supporting the channel. Let's go ahead and get back to the stories. Story 18. This is from 30 years ago, so some details may be different these days. After enlisting in the Army, recruits get a list of everything they must bring to boot camp. On this list was a padlock. During quote-unquote processing, the 5 or so days before the real training starts, recruits are given their military equipment, including duffel bags, and told to put their things they brought with them in the duffel bag. After finally getting everything in, I was left with just a padlock. I had no idea what to do with it, but I noticed if I closed my duffel bag in a certain way, I could close the lock on the hook. So when we got to the training unit and off the cattle trucks, a few hundred drill sergeants are yelling and screaming and telling us to line up, which we do with our duffel bags in front of us. The drill sergeants then proceed to check if the bags are locked, and if not, they grab them at the bottom and whirl them around, flinging the entire contents on the ground. Everyone in the entire company had their stuff dumped except for me and one other guy, only because locking my duffel bag was the only thing I thought of doing. Putting it in my pocket was not an option because they were very clear about not having any civilian items in our uniform pockets. Story 19. My mother's coworker convinced her to get the best possible insurance when pregnant because this coworker had kids deprived of oxygen at birth. She said she could lower it once the kids were 5 and seemed normal. It was a struggle as my parents were both in college and were working while raising my brother, so they were looking to cut costs wherever possible. I ended up being born with a birth defect that required a transplant before 5. Before the new doctor even told her what was wrong, after rushing me away via ambulance, they asked her if she had insurance. She was able to say yes, gold star, platinum, whatever. Many kids passed away even with the top-class care I received, so I surely wouldn't have made it without it. I'm turning 30 next year. Thanks, random lady I've never met. Story 20. Ooh, I got one. I was at college and having a bad time. I'd started a new antidepressant a week or so before, but was also using sleep aids because without them, I just hadn't been able to sleep at all. So one night, I'm lying in my dorm room after having taken my sleep aid, and sleepy me notices I have oddly shaped spots on my arms, and my legs, and my belly. What the heck? What am I, a leopard? Sleepy me thinks. I want to roll over and lie down, but for some reason, the fact that I look like leopard-like bothered me. So just to be safe, I stumbled out of bed to talk to the RA. I remember very little of that part. Anyway, she took me to the hospital, and it turns out I am allergic to one of the ingredients in that new medicine I was taking. It just took a few days to build up in my system. By the time we got to the hospital, my throat was closing and I could hardly breathe. But because of the sleep aid, this seemed like no big deal to me. I remember like 5 doctors and nurses around me. They had oxygen on my face, rubbing my chest, trying to help me breathe. And I got like 7 shots in the hip. Eventually, they let me rest. When I woke up, they made it very clear that had I gone to sleep in my dorm, I would have not woken up. Story 21. I'm in the military, and for that reason, I obviously cannot possess, use, or sell any substances whatsoever. While I was at basic training, I let my brother, who was an avid smoker, use my car so he could keep it running and take care of it. When I finally came home on leave for the first time in a while, he gave the car back to me like normal, and I specifically asked him if there was any grass in the car. He said no, and I left soon after. Well, in the driveway, I was kind of paranoid and figured I'd search my own car, and sure enough, my idiot brother left something in the driver's side door. Thank God I found it and returned it, screaming him out the whole time because not only was it a charge, but it would have ruined my career if I'd gotten caught with it being pulled over or whatever. So yeah, I'm always trying to be safe. Story 22. Saved an email where a lead developer told me to do something stupid. A couple years later, he was now a manager who liked to yell at his subordinates. We were talking about this stupid behavior and he yelled, "Well, why did you do that?" I pulled up his email, clearly instructing me to do just that. He sputtered and walked off, speechless. This guy is one of the reasons I still have trust issues with management, even after a string of really competent, caring, trustworthy managers. Story 23. One day I got hit in the head while surfing. It turned out to be a concussion and I went to the hospital with my mom. I was 17 at the time. We met with the doctor in A and E and he said it's a concussion. We can do a CT scan if you want, but there is probably no need. I was unsure and just said, yeah, I would like a scan. After the scan, I was told that they didn't see anything, but the radiographer would be checking it in the morning. Next day, I got a call to be told that I needed an MRI, that they found a tumor in my brain. If they didn't catch it there, I would have lost my vision from the tumor and it would have been too late to do anything at that stage. Story 24. Was about to put a new load of laundry into my washing machine in the dark and saw what looked to be a large sock still in the washing machine. I put my hand halfway into the washing machine, then pulled my hand back up and thought, I usually don't leave things in my washing machine. Turned on the light and it was a bat sitting in there. And if you're enjoying the video and learning a thing or two from the story so far, like checking to make sure there are no bats in your washing machine, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 25. When I was like 5 years old, my parents took my sister and me to a planetarium show and every kid got a souvenir pencil. It had all the distances of the planets from the sun written on it, Mercury, Venus, Earth, etc. The guy running the planetarium show said something like, hang on to these pencils until 7th grade, kids, and you can use them to cheat on your astronomy tests. He was joking, but I never forgot, and sure enough, it was the exact pencil I used to cheat on astronomy in 7th grade. I felt smart, but also bad because I didn't feel good about cheating and almost never cheated after that. Story 26. I was an expediter at a restaurant. It was super busy, and I was trying to get runners for food. I was about to send out a stack of dim sum when I looked at the ticket again with a note that said no peanuts on the tempura tofu. I'd read it earlier and didn't sprinkle peanuts on it. Another server was about to run it to the table when I told him to wait and get the actual server for the table. We were slammed and he was kind of mad, but went and got him. The actual server comes back and he's all frustrated when I ask him, does your no peanuts guy not like peanuts or is he allergic to them? Server responds with, he's very allergic to them. That's why I put no peanuts on the ticket. He was all being crappy with me. I told him, well, the frickin' tempura tofu is fried in frickin' peanut oil. Didn't realize the head chef was behind me and heard the whole thing. Server didn't know we only used peanut oil. It was an Asian fusion, really nice upscale restaurant. Needless to say, she, the head chef, frickin' reamed this guy. I was a half second from sending that food out too, which would have been bad. Story 27. When I was a kid, I would cross the train rails every day on my way home from school, always listening to my creative MP3 at the time, of course. Important detail, the intersection was in a curved shape, so visibility was very poor. There was one day I was just to be safe, let me take these off just before reaching the rails. I immediately listened to the sound of a train 5 seconds away. I would be gone if I didn't take the earplugs off. Story 28. I went shopping to prepare for my long-distance girlfriend that was staying over, and I saw boxes of baking soda in the market. I thought, oh yeah, it's smart to keep baking soda around in the kitchen in case you have a grease fire. So I grab a box. She's cooking breakfast the next morning while I'm in the shower when I hear her yelling for me. I come out and the stove is on fire. Like a champ, I yell, I'm ready for this, and grab the baking soda and put out the fire. Always keep baking soda in the fridge, kids. Story 29. When I was 18, I went on vacation to Mexico with some friends around 1995. My mother gave me a copy of my birth certificate before I left because she was worried that they wouldn't let me back in the country. This was patently ridiculous, but I folded it up and stuck it in my wallet. 2 years later, I was applying for an expedited passport for an emergency trip abroad. I had everything that I needed to go to the county recorder's office, but there was some problem with one of my identity documents. Fortunately, I had a certified copy of my birth certificate in my wallet, and the passport request was successfully submitted. Thanks, Mom. Story 30. Saved a receipt from my dentist. They charged me, then delayed the procedure I paid for. When I asked for a refund, they changed my entire bill and told me I owed them another $300 when all they actually did was a cleaning and x-rays. I submitted both copies of the invoices to my dental insurance company and told them what happened. 3 weeks later, the insurance company, Delta Dental, resolved the issue with the dentist and I got a refund. Despite the dentist attempting to defraud me, they still regularly call me asking me to come back in. Recently, they changed their name and moved a block down the road to try and hide from the plethora of negative reviews on Yelp. Story 31. I stayed up late one night playing video games, but I left an unfinished can of soda out overnight. When I woke up the next morning, I picked it up, held it about an inch away from my mouth, and was about to drink it. Then I thought, wait a minute, I don't want this hot soda, so I walked over to the sink to pour out what was left. As I poured it, a huge cockroach crawled out of the hole of the pop top. I promptly high-fived myself. Ugh. Story 32. Safety glasses. When working away, it's easy to talk to yourself into doing something really quick without them, and there's always a voice in your head yelling at you to put them on. Stopped grinding the thing I was working on, got my glasses back, and then this chunk flies up and breaks the right lens. Spidey senses 1, Murphy's Law 0. Story 33. I used to live in Ohio, and one morning before work, I grabbed my work pen, and as I was leaving the house, I thought, let me grab my safety goggles. I work at a big industrial timber yard. That particular morning, I was working on the saw machine, basically a 25-ton machine that splits wood logs into 2 parts. Anyways, sometimes some of the logs that we are cutting have something called voracious fiber, a term we use for when the logs sometimes explode like a grenade, sending wooden splinter shrapnel at violent speeds. I remember getting a feeling in the pit of my stomach that something wasn't right, but working in Ohio before the holidays, everyone is stressed, so I chalked it up to seasonal stress. I placed the log onto the machine, began guiding it down the machine, and cut the log in half. I went into Starbucks later that day and ran into Chris Pratt, who was shooting a movie, and he was able to sign my Starbucks coffee cup. Thank God I had my work pen with me. Right. And here I thought the log was going to explode or something in his face. Story 34. When I was in grad school, my dad told me he wanted to get me a new laptop for Christmas and wanted me to review the specs. I convinced him to buy 4 years of accidental damage protection because I'm a klutz and even volunteered to pay for that myself. He covered it anyway. I made sure it was properly registered under the protection plan, etc., and kept all the paperwork in a safe place and made copies just in case. And guess who spilled tea on the laptop keyboard 3 years later? Guess who got their laptop repaired free of charge, except for having to buy a new laptop battery, which I think only cost $20 at the time, and needed to be replaced anyway. The hard drive, mercifully, was intact, and I'd backed up the contents to CDs. This was over 10 years ago. Guess who doesn't have open drink containers around while working on her laptop anymore? If I have a drink, it goes on an entirely different table, always at a range of the laptop at all times. Story 35. So in October, my work offered me a flack because I'd been there a year and I initially said I'd think about it, not really thinking I would need it. Fast forward 1 month and he returns. I declined at first, but right before he started packing up, I decided to go ahead and sign up. My package kicked in on the 1st of December and I injured my hand last night. Now I'm unable to work for 2 weeks. I just turned 22 and never thought I could get injured enough to not work. So, life lesson, if you have the chance to sign up for some sort of buffer in case you get hurt, do it. Story 36. Not me, but my friend. 6 months ago, he was flying across the country and was debating about sneaking some grass into his suitcase for the vacation. He spent a few days debating it, but decided not to because he was paranoid that, on the off chance, a TSA dog would sniff out his suitcase in the terminal. When he arrived at his hotel in the destination city, he was disappointed because he hadn't seen any dogs and figured he could have gotten away with it. But when he opened up his bag, all his clothes were messed up and there was a note from the TSA saying they randomly checked his bag and thanking him for complying with federal regulations. I've never heard someone cry with relief the way he did. Story 37. When I was 20, I worked at a gas station. They had just changed the law to if the customer looked 40 and under, you had to ID them for cigarettes. I was by myself and a lady came in order to pack of Camels. She looked roughly 45, so I didn't ask. I had this nagging feeling throughout the transaction that it would be a very good idea to ask. So before I took her money, I kind of laughed and said, "Mind if I see your ID real quick? I'm really sorry. You're clearly old enough, but they changed the law recently on who we have to ID." She just looked at me and said, "I'm glad you asked." I flashed her work card at me. She was a freaking inspector. If I didn't ask her, I would have been arrested and fined. That was the day I learned to trust my gut, and I also suck at telling people's ages. She was 35. Story 38. Noticed that the schmuck next to me had parked way over the line. I work at a hospital, and even a crappy space like this is a godsend. So I decided to take a picture of my car well within the lines and this car way over the lines, including the license plate. Driver could not get into her car because mine was too close to her driver's door, as it was 2 feet into the adjacent space. So she climbed into the passenger side, opened her door into mine 3 times to dent it, and drove away. Luckily, with both the photo with the license plate and the witness of 2 paramedics, I successfully reported it to the police. Story 39. Summer night, the window in my room was open the whole day. No AC, so my mattress was on the floor beneath the window because it's not that hot there. I decided to go to sleep, turn off the lights, and then remember that the window was open the whole day, so there might be some bugs inside. I turned the lights back on, removed the blanket, and there was a big, hairy spider underneath. Set the house on fire and moved to another city. Story 40. Before wearing a seatbelt was required by law, I never wore it. I approached a toll booth on a rainy night. I stopped at the toll booth and something told me to put my belt on, which I did. About a mile past the toll booth was an area that consistently bottlenecked due to merging lanes, which often caused traffic as the lanes merged. I was stopped in this traffic and I was in the left of 3 lanes. I saw the person behind me approaching way too fast despite a mile of stopped cars ahead of him. He tried to swerve onto the shoulder and clip the rear driver's side corner of my car. This spun me out from the left lane to the right lane. Multiple cars got into accidents avoiding me on the highway, but thankfully I was not hit by any of them. Final tally, I wasn't hurt, my car was totaled, my insurance paid for it, a nightmare unto itself. Since he was an uninsured non-citizen, the cop who showed up after never documented me as a witness of the accident. Neither the cop nor the guy who hit me showed up at court. I did after inquiring about it, and the guy who hit me got away with it. Story 41. In college, I was leaving a party and my friend who had driven me and a few other people offered to give me a ride back home but wouldn't be leaving until later. I declined and just walked home partly because I didn't want to wait and because a friend had been drinking. I got home safely and my friend got in a car accident. Story 42. Not my story, but my grandfather's from the mid-40s when he was a teenager. So he arrives at a road with a double train track cutting across. This is before they had lights and arms that came down. So my grandfather saw a train approaching from his right side in the distance. Close, but he could have made it. And he was going to drive past it, but he said something in his mind stopped him from doing it. A few seconds later, a train flies by the other direction, and had he went for it, he would have been ended. Myself, my cousin, my parents, an entire massive family never would have existed if he decided to try and beat the one train. Story 43. I took my first ever solo vacation when I was 24 to Ireland. When I got there, I was tired from the flight and confused by the car rental system. I'd never rented a car before. I accidentally overpaid for the total coverage Cadillac insurance package. When I got to the place I was staying, I called my dad to see why I had paid so much. He called the car company, figured things out, and he told me that the next day I could drive back to the airport and get my money back for a less crazy insurance package. At the last second, I figured I'd never driven in another country, much less switching to the opposite side of the road, so I decided to just keep the insurance. Halfway through the trip, I made a mistake, hit another car, and totaled my rental car. Didn't pay a penny. Also, Mr. Plunkett of Sneem, I'm still sorry I messed up your car. Story 44. So I decided to make some salt dough because, well, why the heck not? I just wanted to play with it. At the end, I was just going to chuck it out, but mom or dad ended up putting it in a Tupperware container. A few weeks later, my sister had to make a model of a plant or animal cell. It was due the next day, and as it was night, the shops were closed. There was a bit of an argument. Then mom and dad grabbed the salt dough and was like, thank your sister. She was able to make the model and bring it to school the next day. A year or two later, I had the exact same project to do and left it to the last minute like she did. But fortunately for me, I knew where that model of the cell was, so I used that, scribbled out her name, and received an A for my project. Story 45. I'm going to tell you right now, and this goes to all of you. You know that important document you've been working so hard to complete? Back it up now. Your IT department may not have a recovery backup system that covers the said file. If you make a copy somewhere safe, even if it's an outdated copy, it's infinitely better than starting from scratch. The simple copy and paste, just in case, will absolutely save you pain and suffering if something happens. Better yet, email it to your own work email, if it's allowed, to your external mail, Gmail, Yahoo, AOL, whatever, don't laugh, anything else. That way you have a permanent copy whenever you can get your email. Save that data. Story 46. One morning I woke up with a bit of a sniffle. It wasn't really enough for a reasonable person to take the day off, but I had a super long commute if I went in, 2 buses, then the metro to the Pentagon Bus Transit Center, then another bus to my job, and I don't want to have to make that ridiculous commute while I was sick, and then make the same commute back. So I told myself I didn't want to risk making anybody in my office sick, and I was just going to stay home. That day was September 11th, 2001. I would have been at the Pentagon the exact moment it was struck. Story 47. The blizzard of 2010. I'm living in Maryland, and the job I had at the time required us to shovel all the crosswalks in the city. They knew how bad it would be, so they offered everyone a hotel. Well, my girlfriend at the time was visiting from New York, so I went home so she didn't drive down for nothing. Anyway, I had to be at work at 7 a.m., decided to leave at 3 a.m. to shovel out my car, a 2001 Toyota Camry, and give myself enough time to drive into work. It takes about an hour and a half to shovel away 2 feet of snow around my car. I make it most of the day down the highway until the Beltway. I noticed the exit for the Beltway hasn't been plowed. I didn't want to be stuck in the middle of the highway, so I thought I would double back. I had time. So I go the other way and see an exit where I can turn around. Looks partly plowed, so I take the ramp with a bit of extra speed to make it around the turn. Turns out it wasn't plowed at all. I couldn't move forwards or backwards. It was a long ramp, so I decided to shovel out my car in the rear so I can get back on the highway. 75 feet back the width of my car, I begin shoveling. And right as I get out, it's really windy and cold, so I put up my hood. A few minutes later, I hear what sounds like a tree falling in the distance. This is where I decide to play it safe and leave my hood off as it blocks most of my vision despite being freezing cold. About an hour into shoveling, I'm now roughly 50 feet behind my car. I hear a loud noise, I look to my right, and a huge tree begins to fall down towards the frickin' road. I literally had to attempt to sprint towards my car to dodge the branches and all. My heart is pounding at this point, and as I get in my car, another tree falls over next to the first one, towards the woods though. I say to myself, I shoveled enough and forced my little Camry out of the snow and onwards. Funny ending to the story, I end up only being able to drive on roads that were partly plowed and kept driving around Maryland trying to find a road to work. This was before GPS, but I had Google Maps with location. So I tried to follow a dot. LOL. It's now 1:30 p.m. I'm not going to make it to work. Road starts looking familiar. Turns out I somehow looped back around and now I'm home. 10 hours later, 3/4 of a gas tank. Story 48. My friends and I rented a car to drive from Toronto to Florida for my wedding. The plan was to waive the coverage because, hey, my credit card has insurance. But while picking it up, my friend had a last-minute change of heart and signed up for full coverage. We were pretty mad at the extra cost, but about 6 hours into the drive, we hit a deer that completely cripples the van. Just a few hours later, we were on our way in a replacement van at no extra cost. I still wonder how we would have gotten the van back to Toronto if we hadn't gotten the full coverage. Story 49. A few years ago, my wife and I had 2 cars, an old Civic with a ton of miles and a Ford Explorer. My Explorer was approaching 200,000 miles. I knew we'd need to replace it within the next few years, so I convinced my wife that we should start saving up for one. We had each acquired a lot of debt in college and were just now getting to a point where we were making some real headway paying it down, so it wasn't easy convincing her that we should set up the account. But I finally convinced her with the hopes that the SUV would last another 5 years, so we'd have time to save and hopefully be able to buy outright, or at least have a substantial down payment. Sure enough, within the year, the Explorer blows a head gasket, leaking oil in all sorts of places it shouldn't be. No mechanic would touch it without doing a full engine replacement, which would have cost more than the SUV was worth. If we hadn't been putting back in the car fund, we'd have been royally screwed. Story 50. I had a habit in college of always making sure our front door was locked before going to bed because my roommates were pretty bad about making sure it was locked, especially if we were drinking. But I had made such a habit out of it that I would do it before bed even if I was hammered. Towards the end of the year, 2 of our neighbors got robbed on the same night, and guess what? Both of them had been out drinking and didn't lock their front doors. Guarantee we would have been robbed too if it wasn't for my habit of always checking the front door. Story 51. Save the confirmation that I paid a speeding ticket in my glove box. Played hockey with a guy that managed a fleet of police cars in a big municipality in my state. He told me to print your receipt and save it because you might need it. All it takes is someone down in the ticket department to have a bad day or punch out early and forget to enter your confirmation in the system, and you've got an arrest warrant out for you over a stupid speeding ticket. I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. The odds of that happening are a long shot, but I did it anyway. Fast forward to months down the line, I get pulled over for a tail light out, which happened to magically be lighting up again after all this is over. And wouldn't you know it, the cop says I have an unpaid speeding ticket and a warrant out for my arrest. My memories jog, and I told him I have the receipt in my glove box. I give it to him. He takes it back to his car, and sure enough, confirms it with whoever over the radio. I was free to go, and the record was corrected. Moral of the story, save your receipts for any ticket you get, no matter how small. And if any of these stories got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.